All right. So thank you all for making it today. By way of background, I'm a former chemical engineer. I was a terrible engineer though, so I escaped into strategy consulting for a few years. Did that so I could get my chance at getting my MBA, which I ended up doing at Duke's Fuqua School of Business. Um, got my MBA so I could get my dream job in marketing. Got my dream job in marketing with General Mills selling delicious Pillsbury biscuits. Realized deeply disliked my dream job, then realized I had no idea how to find a job when interviews were not provided to me by a career center. This was terrifying because I did everything my coaches had ever told me growing up between undergraduate and grad school, but I was still somehow unprepared for the rest of my life. And that's where my obsession with job searching began. In 2005, I went back to my alma mater at Duke into the business school and was like a strategy consultant for the career center to see if there were ways we could do that better, and just fell in love with the space. So ended up staying for 17 years, and now I run my company Contact Colleague full time in addition to writing and speaking on my books. Um, so we'll talk more about what the insight I had that led me to start writing books is in just a little bit. First, I'm going to go over our learning objectives for today. Okay. And we'll go through our learning objectives after we kind of frame this up. Let's get back to that insight piece. Why did I start writing books? There's the one thing the world does not have a shortage of is job search books. So what led me to start writing mine? It was inspired by the 2008 financial crisis, how hard that job search was specifically. And I'll turn this question back to you. What do you expect to receive when you are stressed out and need to accomplish a new task, a new unfamiliar high stakes kind of task quickly and effectively, first time out? Do you expect tips or do you expect instructions? So just to make it a little more specific, and we're going to use the chat box a lot today. Let me give you a few examples. Let's say that you get a bookshelf from IKEA and you want to assemble it. Do you open the box hoping or expecting to find tips or instructions? You only have one or the other. In an ideal world, we'll get both of everything, but which one is more helpful when time matters and effectiveness also counts? Yeah, instructions. If we could have one, give me instructions. What about driving from point A to point B? When we ask our GPS, how do we get to our destination? Do we want tips? Like, think about taking a right here. Or do we want instructions like, here's the most efficient route, take a left in 2 miles? Yeah, instructions streaming through. Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Like, driving can be stressful enough. Getting lost is horrible. Now, this one's a little bit different. What do we expect versus what do we receive? What do we expect to hear when we get guidance on job searching? Do we expect to hear tips or instructions? Yeah, tips are streaming in. And to me, that's like really surprising. Everything else in our life, we expect instructions, but for some reason, have grown accustomed to hearing tips for the job search. I would argue that instructions seem to be pretty effective in every other kind of stressful, high stakes arena of our lives. I realized during the '08 financial crisis, when people were getting laid off and losing their jobs and getting interviews was really hard, they had the energy to follow instructions, but not the energy to curate tips into some sort of usable or efficient format. It shouldn't that be my job? I was the one getting paid to give the career coaching guidance. The only problem was there were no instructions to teach. It was all tips. And I'd been blind to it myself, having been a career coach for a few years at that point. So that was when I looked around. Nobody else had made this set of instructions yet. So that's when I decided I'm as qualified as anyone to take a stab at it. So that's what led to my first book called The 2-Hour Job Search. And we'll talk about what that covers versus what the job closer covers on the next slide. But big takeaway here. If you've ever felt anxiety when someone's told you to prepare a great resume, that's not really on you. That's a tip. That's not an instruction. You can't replicate a tip any more than you can replicate a list of ingredients. You can replicate a recipe because there are amounts and orders of operations. So prepare a great resume, that's a tip. Like, what are the mechanics and processes for that? Those are instructions. That's what you don't have. Similarly, if you've felt anxiety when you're told to sell yourself, not your fault. That's a tip, not an instruction. All of these other things that you've been told to do, if you felt anxiety or apprehension about these, that's because these are tips. They're not instructions. How can you possibly replicate them in any sort of efficient way? So come into this with a beginner's mind. It's like you can't blame someone for not knowing how to play the violin if you've never given them lessons, or swim, or ride a bike. You've never been trained to do these things that we're going to cover today. By the end of today's session, at the end of our 2 hours, you'll have a process, a simple recipe for each one of these things. So treat this as one effective science-based set of recipes. If you like them, you can use them immediately. If you don't, you can pursue other recipes, but I know these will get the job done if followed exactly. That's the goal for the work that I put out there. So our learning objectives for today. We're going to make sure by the end of today's session, you feel more comfortable using recipes to quickly create effective resumes and cover letters. Understand which interview questions comprise the majority of your outcome and how to answer those well. And then train you how to win advocacy systematically in your negotiations and weekly manager meetings in an authentic and simple fashion. Okay. So this may or may not surprise you. Job searching has gotten way harder in the last 20 years, I would say. I think it's not your parents' job search, but your parents probably have strong feelings for how you're supposed to do it. Here's what changed. These are the rough steps of a job search from start to finish. Where I saw people getting stuck most frequently in 2008, when I realized this training is broken, it was in that middle section. It was, how do we get that first interview? So my first book was a big, long set of instructions called the 2-Hour Job Search. I did this talk in the fall. You can watch the video of it, but it gives very specific instructions for how to start from knowing what you want to do. How do you get that first interview? Basically, how do you network systematically? Your parents didn't really have to do this in their job search. This is a brand new set of responsibilities that you get to enjoy that they didn't have to worry about. They could focus more heavily on all of the other steps because that's really all they had to do. They were protected by geography. Online job postings weren't really a thing. So they could go to Kinko's, print out their resume and cover letter on nice paper, put postage on an envelope and mail it off. And that took time, money, and effort. And people didn't have unlimited amounts of those. So they would be selective in who they'd apply to. Companies would get a dozen applicants for a particular role instead of hundreds. But this is the job search that you're in now. You have the steps 3 through 5 that have been added to your plate, but your days are no longer than your parents were. So how do we make time to do that networking with strangers? That is pretty important to get that first interview. A study at the New York Fed showed that for every one person hired through an online job posting application, 12 were hired through internal referrals. So the engineer in me doesn't have to like networking. I'm not into the people thing, but we have to aim at the 12 out of 13 jobs rather than the 1 out of 13 jobs. So how do we save time from all the other steps, get them done effectively, but not over-engineer them so that we have more time to create relationships and learn about the job that we want? That's what we're going to cover today. The things your parents had to do, but never really developed systems for doing. Okay. We're going to split these into 3 categories: before the interview, during the interview, and after the interview. So just to give the talk some shape, we're going to start off before the interview. We're talking about cover letters and resumes, just a quick pass through on those. A lot of you have your resumes done. I'm going to hopefully make you feel less anxiety about both resumes and cover letters. My one request of you today is please ask questions. Don't save them till the end. I want you to be skeptical consumers. So if something I say doesn't make sense or sounds inefficient or ineffective, please hit me up in the chat box. We're going to have some time for exercises along the way, but I really want this to be interactive to make it as fun and educational as possible. So does that sound good? Cameras are on. Seeing some nods. Okay, great. Let's get to it. Start off with resumes. What do we stress about in resumes in the chat box? What's the element that it takes the most time and anguish and pain? What do you hate most about having to prepare them? I hate resumes almost an impossible amount, but we have to do them. They're kind of an evil. Skills and references. Thank you, Amanda. Not having good qualifications, said somebody else. Please make your comments to all. Yeah, your qualifications. We'll talk about the qualifications in a little bit. There's a funny thing that happens. Job descriptions. The descriptions of jobs. How do we factor in the descriptions of jobs into our resumes? Yeah, so there are lots of editing there. What else do we hate? Let me put it another way. Do you stress more about the words in bold or the bullet points? Bullet point descriptions. Yeah, that's what always stressed me out the most. It's like, how do we wordsmith this? So funny thing happens with resumes. So there was a study done by the Ladders, and they found on average hiring managers spent just 6 seconds looking at a resume. There are variations of the study that say 7 seconds or 30 seconds, or basically they're not spending a lot of time reading. What differentiated the study by the Ladders is they hooked hiring managers' eyes up to eye tracking software. and produced a heat map. Where are they looking in that 6 seconds? This was what was fascinating to me. They found that the 80% of the 6 seconds, so 4.8 seconds, was spent on the following items. See if you can detect what they have in common. The places where you worked, the places where you went to school, the job titles that you've held, and your dates of employment. What do those things have in common? In the chat box. Is it the stuff that we stress about? I would say they're all objective. They're all words that go in bold on your resume, which are not the ones that stress us out. What stresses us out is the bullet points, where we have some ability to finesse words. Like that's what really stresses us out. But this shows that only 1.2 out of 6 seconds is going towards actually consuming your bullet points. The rest of it is going towards your objective criteria, the things that you can't change about your biography. So no, Amanda, the takeaway, thank you for asking that, is the opposite. Focus on the objective criteria. That's what they're actually looking at. All of the bullet points you could, and resume review companies will make the argument that you need to make the best impression you can in that 1.2 seconds, but that's kind of a ridiculous statement. The majority of their attention is on the things you can't change. So really, does it matter what we put in those bullet points? Let's just do our best. So 80% of their attention's on the items that you can't change, your objective qualifications, not your subjective framing of your experiences. So hopefully that should make you feel a lot better. Like they're just not spending that much time consuming it. So we can just do our best. When hiring managers are looking through resumes, they are seeking easy to defend candidates, people who've done this job before but somewhere else, and people who went to schools that they know and like, or worked at companies whose names they recognize. No one will ever criticize them for selecting candidates to interview from those categories. But and in those cases, those people do have a fast track to get interviews. But when those candidates are not available, hiring managers will have a more open mind to who they consider for a job. Or if they're looking for entry-level people, they don't want to spend as much time, so they'll be a little bit more open-minded, as in your position. But this study really reinforces that the challenge is not getting your resume right. It can feel like our resume is not ready for prime time yet. It's not ready to be sent. The challenge isn't getting the resume right. It's getting the resume seen by a human being. And that takes networking. That's why the 2-hour job search exists. So how do we create a resume that's good enough, but doesn't consume our lives? Because we need that time for other more important tasks. Now, a common question I'll get here is, what about keyword optimization? I hear I'm supposed to copy keywords from the job posting and put it into the resume. I hear I'm supposed to copy the job posting and put it into 1-point font on my resume and clear text so that it beats the ATS system. There is actually no data. There is no research study that shows that anything you can do will actually predictably beat an ATS system. It's an easy thing for experts to say, oh, you should customize your resume for every job posting, because they're not the ones who have to do that work and endure that pain. But it's irresponsible, in my opinion. I think people have spoken into existence. I've talked to hiring managers and said, when you use your resume systems, what are you actually looking for? And the only keyword that they would say that they searched on, it wasn't like managed versus supervised. They would look up like things like Python or certain certifications if those were required for the job. But the only thing they would otherwise look for is the job title that they were trying to fill. Consistently, I talked to a half a dozen people, and that was the only word they would say would get you to appear in one of their searches. So don't stress about trying to optimize your resume. My rule of thumb is do your best resume for each job function you're pursuing, but we'll talk about how similar I expect those resumes to be in just a moment. Okay, big takeaway, don't stress about resumes. There are better places to stress. The resume is not it. So here's a quick kind of mental diagnostic for getting through future resumes quickly if your resume is already done this year. I recommend Ed's 3-hour rule. My former supervisor at Duke's Business School, his name was Ed, and he said, assume your job search will take 100 hours. I don't want you spending any more than 3 of them on your resume. And this resonated with me. It gives the resume the appropriate attention, but not too much attention. So I like to split resumes up into basic, good, and great. Resumes, the one common characteristic of all 3 is that they are error-free. There's nothing that 100% of people, like if there's a typo, 100% of coaches would say that's wrong. If there's a formatting issue, 100% of coaches would say that's wrong. But outside of that, error-free formatting, that's table stakes. It makes it hard for a potential advocate to nominate you for an interview. if your resume has errors on it. So we want to keep the errors out of it. This is critically important. Everything else is nice to have. Now, your bullets in a basic resume just describe your responsibilities. Your bullets would be the same as the person who had that job before and after you. A good resume would talk about the projects you completed. So what's a little bit about the of what kind of experiences did you have? A great resume will talk about the impact that you had. Why did they pay you to do this? To get some benefit out of your work. So even if you don't have financial or numeric numbers to cite, you can talk about the positive effect your work had. In a basic resume, results are not usually provided. So again, it's a resume anyone who had your position could use, not what we're going for. A good resume would be provide results when they're quantitative, so improved sales by 20%. And a great resume will always have results. So why were you paid? Even if it was the point of your project was just to reduce company risk, you can't know how much you were reducing risk. But you'd want to say this reduced risk of this project. So I recommend aiming for objectively perfect, subjectively good enough. Subjectively good enough means if any two coaches could possibly disagree on whether a change was an improvement or not, that's subjective. It's a matter of opinion instead of a matter of fact. Now, a typo, that's a matter of fact. It's wrong. It's either right or wrong. But once we start debating, is this better or worse or about the same, that we're getting into subjective territory. That's a sign to stop working on your resume, because the more you work on it, the more risk you introduce of putting errors into it. So do a good thorough proofread one last time once it's objectively perfect, subjectively good enough, and move on. It's easy for me as a speaker to say you need a great resume to succeed in your job search, but the reality is you can get by just fine with a good resume. And frankly, you can do that too with a basic resume. Basic resume, don't think about it as a 99 out of 100. Think about it as a pass rather than a fail. It's a bar you need to clear. Once you get beyond that, making it even better and better and better has minimal value. So we just want to make sure it's good enough for a potential advocate to hand it off to their boss or their boss's boss without worrying that they'll be embarrassed by doing so. And that means no errors. Okay, so we had some people mention skills like I don't have the right qualifications, I don't have the right experience. When you read job descriptions, it can be pretty discouraging. And there's a big gender bias in job descriptions as well, where men will apply to jobs when they have when they meet half the qualifications, and women will be more likely to only apply when they have 80% of the job qualifications. So I'm not a fan of taking job descriptions very seriously. Typically, the way they're written is whatever the position had as a job description the last time is brought back to life, and a couple bullet points are added to it. So there's bloat for the kind of qualifications they expect you to have based on the person who had the job last, but nothing is ever deleted. So it can just be really, really frustrating. So I would argue you all have the skills you need. Transferable skills are every life skills. You've all done them. We did this analysis at Duke where we grabbed job postings from a bunch of different sectors, investment banking and consulting and marketing and operations. And we laid them side by side and broke down what are they actually asking for. And we defined something that we call the 4 buckets of work, because all the postings asked for the same exact things, just using different language. The 4 things they asked for were the ability to lead, the ability to collaborate, the ability to get things done, and the ability to solve tough problems. You've all done that in your high school lives, in your college lives, in your clubs, in your sports activities, any team that you function in. You've done these 4 things. So don't sell your experiences short just because you didn't get paid for them necessarily. But you've done the 4 buckets of work, and so has everybody else who has taken time off work to care for a sick loved one or raise a family. Transitioning veterans are always very self-conscious about their ability to do a business job, but in reality, they've done the 4 buckets of work more than anybody else. So like, absolutely, they're qualified. You have these qualifications. You just need to learn to speak about your non-paying engagements in the same kind of language. So again, I suggest 1 resume per job function. So if you're targeting multiple job functions, feel free to make a resume for each one, but I don't want you customizing resumes for each one, because if the proposition is certain downside plus uncertain upside, that's a bad gamble every time. The time and energy it takes to customize a resume for a particular job posting when you know you're probably not going to hear back from the job posting anyway, that's certain downside with uncertain upside. So 1 resume per job function and call it good for the season. Just make sure you don't keep tinkering with it to introduce errors. Okay, so the bullets themselves, I don't want you to think about them as being speaking for themselves. I want you to think about the bullets in your resume as being a preview of your interview. So each bullet point should be a story that you're prepared to tell. When you think about your interview stories, those should be bullet points. I've had interviews where multiple actually, where interviewers have said that's an interesting looking story. Tell me that. Oh, that's a nice looking bullet point. Tell me about that. And so they'll pick out their favorite bullet points and ask you to tell the story behind it. If you start with your interview stories and turn those into bullet points, and AI makes this really easy, it's very easy to do. But if you kind of go take that job responsibility approach to resume bullets, it's a much harder. Big takeaway here: don't tinker with your resume if they're already good enough for this interview season. Save it for the next time you're done interviewing, and then go ahead and turn those interview stories that you've gotten accustomed to telling, turn those into bullet points, and make your resume into a cheat sheet for your next interview. So by treating them like stories, and this word story will come up again in a higher impact way very shortly. Okay, so that's a quick primer on resumes. Let's talk briefly about cover letters as well. Do we have to write cover letters? Is the most common complaint I hear from job seekers, and I get it. You hear company representatives hate on cover letters. You hate writing them. You wonder if they even get read. Like, what's the point of this? Why are we doing this? Why does this take so much time? I agree with you. We never know if any particular cover letter will be read. So again, we want to focus on being good enough quickly rather than perfect slowly. So just sort of like on the resume, we want to be objectively perfect, subjectively good enough. So we want to be good enough quickly here and not perfect slowly. So cover letters, how do we crank them out quickly and authentically so that we have them in case we happen upon somebody who really cares about cover letters, because there are those people out there. You just never know from the outside when you apply to a job or when you hand a cover letter off to a contact, you never know if they're going to be the kind that loves cover letters or hates them. So let's just get in the habit of making a good enough cover letter quickly so that we always have a decent one at the ready, but we can produce these in about 5 or 10 minutes once you have the right formula. I'm going to give you that formula now. So important to note, cover letters do something different than the rest of your application package. They synthesize your resume. They shouldn't restate it. So it's like if you go to Costco, you know how they have samples? If instead of giving you samples, they just handed you lists of ingredients for the various dishes, like you would hate that. That would ruin the whole point of going to Costco. So like you don't really get a sense for what does this even taste like. That's why they give you free samples. It pulls all those ingredients together and makes it make sense in your mind. Your cover letter should do the same thing for your resume. If you're restating your resume, it's like getting a list of ingredients at Costco. You want to give out free samples. So tell people in your cover letter what the highlights, what does your resume actually mean to them? And the right format makes this much easier. So the goal of this cover letter is to motivate the reader to interview you instead of someone else. So why you is the question that you're effectively trying to answer. By knowing more specifically what question we're trying to answer, it makes the writing a cover letter much easier. So employers want to know that 3 factors from you when you write it in your cover letter. They want to know that your interest is authentic, specific, and informed. Authentic, they don't want you to pretend to like the company just to get the name on your resume. They want to know that your interest is genuine. They don't want you to just kind of use platitudes and be general. They want you to be pretty specific. Do you know what our organization or what our industry is about? And they don't want you kind of just bluffing your knowledge. They want you to be informed. Have you done some homework? Have you synthesized information about what it means to be a good employee at that company? Do you understand the kind of work you'll be asking them to do? And as an added bonus, do I actually want to receive an email from you? So we don't want to overwhelm them with like a 500-word cover letter. We want to show good business writing. If you've ever written to your intern, if you've ever done an internship and had to write an email to your boss's boss, like they don't want you to show your work. They want the shortest possible email you can send. Tell them what they need to know. So that's the spirit we want to take into this. Okay. Oh, Noel, great question. How do you recommend addressing the cover letter if you do not know the hiring manager's name? I don't have strong feelings on this one. To whom it may concern is fine. I don't really have a strong feeling on that. I think what we want to do is minimize risk. If you use Mr. and Miss, then we don't know what pronouns the person who's reading it uses. So we could potentially alienate someone. If you go with the wrong name when you're not sure and you just take a guess at somebody, you might alienate the person if it's a different person reading it. So to me, to whom it may concern, or that's going to be minimally offensive. We just want to minimize our risk here. Okay. So I recommend a technique called RAC for your cover letters. It makes these very formulaic and systematic. So RAC stands for reason, anecdote, connection. So in your cover letter, we'll state a reason why they should pick you to interview. You'll back up your reason. Maybe your reason is problem solving. You'll back it up with an anecdote. Here's when I was a really good problem solver, or here's the best piece of proof I have that I solve problems well. But the most important part is the connection. This is where you demonstrate that you understand what the company cares about too. What's the benefit to the employer if it's not readily apparent? So how is your problem solving going to help me as an autonomous vehicle company? That's where people get tripped up. Okay, so as I showed, AI is great for this. It gives you it can give you 10 projects, each of which are a potential connection that you can use in your cover letters. So I consider the cover letter death spiral. I think RAC is the way out. The cover letter death spiral is my term for that thing where you hear that people don't read cover letters, so you don't spend as much time on them, which means that you make a longer cover letter. And as you write longer cover letters, corporate representatives want to read them even less. And then they talk about how much they hate cover letters. So it's like this death spiral, everybody starts hating on cover letters. The way to beat the death spiral is to write a good one quickly. And it takes just as much, I would say it takes less work to write a good cover letter using RAC than it does to write a bad one, the 500 word version. So here's a model for a 250 word cover letter. I can do this in under 200 as well. So the opening paragraph is the most important one. It highlights if you have any advocates of that company. Hi, dear Franklin, I'm interested in Darlington, and I do like using first names only for this because, again, you don't know what pronouns people are using. So going with a Mr. or Miss or Mrs. and trying to guess, to me, is not a great position. It may feel weird to use people's first names, but it's just kind of the modern world we're living in. So dear Franklin, I'm interested in Darlington's open marketing associate position there. So state your position that you're interested in. After speaking with current associates, Nicole Yazzie and Angela Charles, I believe I can contribute the following to your organization. So what it would look like in a cover letter is you're going to put your point, analytics, in bold. So problem solving in this case, back it up with an anecdote. I received 2 promotions in 3 years, the fastest rate possible at BIFCO, for my ability to break complicated equipment issues into solvable tasks. Okay, great. Now, what does that mean to me as Franklin at Darlington? My ability in this area would help me keep major projects like product redesigns and packaging changes running smoothly and on time at Darlington. I know that those things can drag on and take forever, and they can have hiccups when people don't stay with the program. So it shows that I know what I'm talking about. So that reasons in pink, the anecdotes in blue, and the connections in red. Then you'd add a couple more racks. And then the final paragraph is just a brief request for an interview and contact info. I think this would be a great mutual fit and would like the chance to interview. If you have any questions, please contact me at number and email. That's it. That's what we're going for. So really, the only thing that's going to change is if you are pursuing different job functions, this kind of connection sentence will change a little bit. But your best proof point of being analytical is not going to change probably from cover letter to cover letter. So that probably stays the same, the pink and the blue. You may just need to tweak the red, and maybe you won't need to. And these literally the only thing you'll need to change is that first paragraph. Who are your advocates if you have them? All right. So in closing to this section, neither resumes nor cover letters reliably gets you an interview alone. 12 out of 13 jobs go to the person who networks their way in. Only 1 out of 13 goes to the person that applies online. I recommend the 5% rule. If you are hearing back from more than 5% of the online job postings that you fill out from companies you like, this does not count the ones that you panic apply to. So just companies you like. If you're hearing back from more than 1 out of 20, then you keep apply first, network in your downtime. But for most of us, if it works now, it's not going to work when you graduate. So most of us, it's less than 5% and by a wide margin. So if you're getting less than 5% response rates, it's not a great use of your time. Network first and apply in your downtime. So neither a resume or cover letter gets you the interview alone. Follow recipes to produce acceptable, and I would say even great content fast. There's nothing better than seeing a short, concise cover letter. It just makes me want to get to know you better because I know I can't wait to get emails from you if you're that concise. And when done well, your resume is an interview cheat sheet, and your cover letter answers, why should we consider you? Okay, so that's it. Those are the table stakes. We have to have a resume. We generally have to have a cover letter ready to go. But what about the interview itself? So great news. And okay, we'll start with a thought exercise for everybody. This will be something that you do on your own. let's say that you are on your internship. For those of you that are looking for internships, if you're looking for a full-time job, and let's say that you're at the welcome happy hour for your start class at your company. So you're hanging out, you're enjoying a beverage with your friends and new colleagues, and all of a sudden a special guest walks in. It's the CEO of the company. And this is based on a true life experience had by me, not a fun experience. So this is what happens. The CEO sees your group and smiles and walks on over, and they say, "Thank you so much for joining the team. We're so excited to have you. Tell me about yourselves." And looks at your group and looks at you to answer first. Generally, based on the size of the group, you're going to plan on taking about 30 seconds to answer that question. And you're going to start answering it right now to your in your head on your own. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds, start answering. Tell me about yourself to the CEO of your company starting right now. Go. Okay, that's time. In the chat box, how did that go for you? Decent, good. Abhinav, thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have a similar or different experience? I would have had a very different experience. Felt like there was stuttering in my head and what to say. Noel, I am right there with you. Chaotic, Eve, that's such a great word. That is spot on. Vague, awkward, yeah, crammed. Yeah, there's so much you could possibly say, and this person's important. And how do you distill it quickly? Thank you all for sharing that. And I realize it's not fun to volunteer negative self-reviews, but this is a pretty important topic. Uncomfortable, Sarah, I'm right there with you. This actually happened to me on my internship at General Mills. I somehow got the full-time offer. I'm not sure how, but I was in my group and the CEO walked up and said, "Tell me about yourselves," and looked at me to go first. And I just blew up. I just stammered and stuttered. And then everybody else who had a chance to think about it did better than I did. But still, I was like, this is crazy. How many millions of, like, I've literally been asked, "Tell me about yourself," thousands of times. How can this cause so much stress? It is the single most important question we answer hundreds of times in a lifetime, yet we don't have a framework for it. We're constantly improvising. And to me, this is just a massive missed opportunity because first impressions matter. And we'll talk even, I'll show you some stats about how much they matter when we get to the interview portion a little bit more deeply. But to me, it's almost unconscionable that you probably learned an interview framework called CAR or STAR for answering behavioral questions. Tell me about a time where you led a team. And you have this format that you follow, but we don't have a format for answering "Tell me about yourself." So that to me, that was just very startling and striking and not brand enhancing in my case. So I want to make sure that you feel better about answering this question, even when you don't get time to prepare like I did just now. You don't always know what this question's coming. You still need to be able to kind of rattle off something pretty decent. Okay. Yeah, Amanda, you never know what like this is a total stranger. There's 100 things I could say about myself. Which three are they going to find most appealing? So yeah, we're all flying blind. So the idea that there could possibly be a correct answer is impossible. So because there's no correct answer, we don't understand our audience and their needs. We have to go with the best available answer. So how do we construct the best available answer is the question that I set to answer based on that experience. So people were successful with a 2-hour job search. They started getting interviews. They were like, "Steve, what interview book do you recommend?" And I'm like, I kind of hate them all. They all give you tips instead of instructions. So it only took me 8 years to write the job closer. So it was really to answer questions like, "Tell me about yourself," and why this company that I hated all the other content out there. I had frameworks for them, but there was no book to deliver them in. So that's really what set me out to write the second book. So my question to you, I think we all know where we're going with this. Does "Tell me about yourself" matter? I think it does. But I'm an engineer by heart, so I like analysis. I like numbers. So Frieder, Van Eyck, and Raymark did a study where they measured how, for interviews where decisions were made during the interview itself, how far into the interview were decisions made. So by definition, 100% of decisions are made by the end of the interview. 100% of interview decisions made during the interview are made by the end of the interview. So our overall, we're going to end at 100%, but this number is going to get higher. So this number will be less than this number, which will be less than that, which will be less than 100. So my question to you in the chat box, what percent, well, first, what happens in the first minute of an interview? A certain percentage of interviewers make up their mind about candidates in the first minute. What happens in that first minute in the chat box? First impression, yep. Introductions, yes. So handshake, eye contact. Excellent. Yep, that's the first minute. Okay, what percent of interview decisions do you think are made by the end of the first minute? Type it in the chat box. Again, you've never been taught this, so no embarrassment here. 2%, 50%, 10%, wide range. Uh, Excellent. 15%, 40%. Good news, Abhinav. Once again, you are closest to the pin. Good news, interviewers are not insane. Only 6% of interview decisions are made by the end of the first minute. So, whew. Okay, first impression handshake. Yeah, it's good. Good to do those better than badly, but it would be insane if the number was that much higher. Okay, now what happens after introductions and a little bit of small talk? What question usually happens next? How do they signal they're shifting into the interview? What are your goals might come a little bit later. There's usually a common one or with two different versions that they'll transition you into the interview with. Okay, a little bit before that, tell me about yourself. Thank you, Reed. Yeah, our topic for this section. So usually they'll say, "Tell me about." Oh, great. So we're up watching the same sports match. We went to the same school. We both like Lawrence. Because how could you not? Lawrence is the best. And then they'll say, "Well, tell me about yourself," or they'll say, "Walk me through your resume," as a way to signal that the formal part of the interview, the Q&A portion of the interview, is starting. Okay, so that happens by the end of the 5th minute. You're going to get tell me about yourself, or I consider its equivalent, walk me through your resume. I think it's to your advantage to answer both of those questions identically using the framework I'm going to teach you. But what percent of interview decisions do you think are made by the end of the 5th minute? So it's going to be between 6 and 100%. These numbers are cumulative. 30, 25, 15, 45. Okay, tighter range. You're all really close. Nicely done. Okay, excellent. Yeah, 38%. So some of you are right on the mark. Ava, JD, 40, both of you. 38% of decisions are made by the end of the 5th minute. Now this number starts to get a little bit scary because, 2 out of 5 interviews are decided by the time you finish answering, "Tell me about yourself," or "Walk me through your resume." That means like we can go kind of wrong. We can go off the rails here. This to me, we need to be very, very precise and thoughtful about how we answer that. That doesn't mean we need to memorize our answer fully, but it means we need to understand what are we trying to accomplish with our answer, and how do we deliver something that our audience finds appealing. Okay, so we'll go into tell me about yourself, how we answer that. Just before we do, after tell me about yourself, that's typically when we get what I call the whys. Why do you want to work for our company? Why do you want this position? Why do you want to work in this sector if it's like consulting or investment banking or something like that? What percent of decisions do you think are made by the end of the 15th minute after those why questions? 90, 50, 60, 75. Okay, excellent. Nicely done. You are the most accurate group I've ever had. 77%. So 77% of interview decisions, 3 out of 4, are done by the time you get through what I call the big 4. Tell me about yourself plus a subset of the 3 whys. Why this company, why this role, why this sector. So it wouldn't make sense to practice all interview answers equally when 4 of them achieve the 80-20 rule. 4 of them disproportionately matter in terms of your outcome. So we're going to pay special attention to the big 4. We'll start with tell me about yourself. We'll talk about the whys in the next section. But let's tackle the 38% of decisions. What's a framework that we can use to make answering this question that we get asked hundreds of times in our life, but still somehow always feel unprepared for and always kind of wing it? What's a framework we can use to make it easier and more effective? Okay. So just really quickly, why do you think interviewers ask, tell me about yourself? There's multiple right answers here, but in the chat box, what do you think their motivation is? What are they trying to learn here that, that will help them identify if you're somehow a fit for the company? Or is that even a goal? Why do they ask this question? It seems to be in every single interview. See if you're prepared, Abhinav. I like this. It's like a free throw in basketball. Like, you know it's coming. Are you prepared for it? I'm a big believer in preparation for predictable challenges. See what you care about. I love that, Chloe. That's so well put. To learn more about us. Yeah, what motivates you as a professional? The motivation is key. It's the whys of your career, not necessarily the whats, but a lot of people tend to go to the whats. Analyze soft skills. Yeah, so how do you read your audience? If they can work well with you, yeah, that rapport. Yeah, so you're all getting the hang of it. This is a kind of a soft skill type question. See if you're confident. Can you present well? Do you have executive presence? Yeah, so it's not really like they're not looking for you to sell yourself. They're looking for kind of the person that you are. But that's where a lot of people can go wrong with it. They try to turn this into a sales question. Here's why I'm a great candidate. But that's dangerous. So have any of you ever heard "tell me about yourself" answered poorly in an interview or at a good company event or on a first date or anywhere? I mean, we ask this question to ourselves. Have you ever heard it answered badly? And if so, like what makes an answer to "tell me about yourself" bad? I feel like we're all connoisseurs of this. Terrible "tell me about yourself" answers consist of the following shortcomings. Which ones do you dislike most? Focus on one thing. Yeah, they get like really deep. Stammering, like they don't really know what they're saying, don't say it well, and it's dragging. Yeah, the duration can really throw people off. Predictable. Okay, yeah, it's going to be these three pieces of data about you, and okay, it's where you went to college, where you went to high school, where you went to college, where you're from. How they talk to me. Oh gosh. Ooh. Brag about stuff. Yeah, so self-promotion's not fun. The fillers, the likes and ums. Okay, yeah. So we all have great experience with bad answers to "tell me about yourself." Do we ever call timeout and give people feedback on this? Probably not. That would be pretty weird on a first date. Hey, timeout. Here's how you did. Here's some rooms for improvement. Here's where you excelled. So to me, this is terrifying because we all answer it, and it might sound like it went okay, but we never get feedback. We never give feedback, but we've all heard people answer it poorly. So how do we actually know we're doing it well? So that's terrifying to me. Like we're all kind of flying blind, thinking we're doing okay because we've never gotten negative feedback, but nobody ever gives negative feedback except coaches. So we need to go in with a plan. It's something that we feel more confident in because winging it has deficiencies, and we've all seen those in real life. So to me, tell me about yourself. It's a relationship building spoon. Other question are sell yourself forks. You can't really eat cereal all that effectively with a fork. So if you try to use a fork to eat cereal, you're gonna be frustrated. To me, that's what people do when they try to sell themselves during "tell me about yourself." It's a relationship building question. It's used to transition you from small talk into the rest of the interview. Our goal from a game theory perspective is to carry our likability and enthusiasm and energy from small talk. We are vibing with this person. We are bonding over our hometowns or Lawrence or basketball. And they like us and we've got some energy. And then if they say, well, tell me about yourself, and we turn into like ScriptBot 5000 who has a fully memorized, rehearsed answer to "tell me about yourself," you turn into a different person. That's very jarring. Your energy shifts and they don't really know what to do with it. They want the person who was talking basketball or Lawrence hotspots back in the room. So we want to use this question to build rapport and a relationship. We have the whole rest of our interview to sell ourselves, and we will do that there. So this is a spoon. Don't use it to do what forks are better at, and vice versa. Okay, so energy and likability, that's our goal. So now that we know what the goal is, that we want to give the employers, they ask you this question to make sure that you have a story that makes sense. Are you being honest with me? It's a lie detector test, essentially. They use the small talk portion of the interview to get a baseline. What's your executive presence? Do I feel comfortable around you? Do you represent well in person? Then the first 5 minutes, then that's the lie detector. What's your natural energy like? And then they want to see if that energy stays in the room or departs when they ask you, tell me about yourself. Does your story make sense, and do I believe you when you tell it? So we want to keep consistent energy from small talk, and that means talking about stuff that we genuinely care about. Okay, step one. So I did a lot of research. How do you create a good answer or a good framework for answering "tell me about yourself" from scratch? There was nothing to really look at. The most formulaic thing I'd heard was past, present, and future, but that's a lot more like a tip than an instruction. What do you say from each of those sections? And doesn't that get very long for a 20 or 30-second chat? So stories. I think the key first element, the first principle that we should start with is this is a story. Research shows that stories are incredibly effective ways to deliver information. That's why we have had story time since we were kindergarteners. In school, we'd sit in the circle on the carpet squares and listen to our teacher tell us stories that illustrated messages that were important for us to learn. But Bauer and Clark found that facts woven into stories were 6 to 7 times more memorable than a list of facts delivered alone. So stories help us remember things, and you want the information that you relate to be memorable. To do that, we need to put something into a story format. Now, what makes something a story? I would argue that it's causation. So a cause and effect relationship. I could talk to you about causation. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm going to give my voice a break, and I'm going to bring in some experts to talk about causation. This was actually the genuine inspiration for the model that I'm going to teach you, a technique called FIT. In the chat box, are any of you familiar with a couple of gentlemen named Matt Stone, Trey Parker and Matt Stone? And if so, how do you know of them? Yes, Noel, South Park. Yeah, they are the creators of South Park. They also did Book of Mormon. For those of you who like musicals, they did Team America and a bunch of movies. For those of you who like movies, they've done rather well. They dropped in to a NYU undergraduate film class by surprise. So MTV was there to film it. This was like 10 years ago, and MTV was there to film it. And because it's MTV, it has some sweet like early 2000s camera work. But they talk about how do you make a good story, and they speak to this causation piece specifically. So I will say, Matt and Trey, take it away.
Don't move.
Please welcome the Emmy Award-winning and Tony
nervous. I don't know why I'm
creators of South Park, Matt Stone and Trey Parker. You think I'm kidding, right?
Hey!
Our whole South Park writers' room, one whole wall is one of these. And we've got it split up into 3 acts.
We have different colored markers just like here too. Look at.
Yep.
We have that.
And I walk around with the markers like this, and we'll go, okay, we do a show about this.
This is our writer's room.
Oh, okay, well somewhere, okay, this would be a funny scene if we had this.
True.
Each individual scene has to work as a kind of funny sketch. You don't want one scene that's just like, well, what was the point of that scene? We found out this really simple rule that maybe you guys have all heard before, but it took us a long time to learn it. But we can take these beats, which are basically the beats of your outline, and if the words and then belong between those beats, you're f***ed, basically. You got something pretty boring. What should happen between every beat that you've written down is either the word therefore or but, right? So what I'm saying is that you come up with an idea and it's like, okay, this happens, right? And then this happens. No, it should be this happens and therefore this happens. But this happens, therefore this happens. And that, as soon as we are able to, and literally sometimes we'll write it out to make sure we're doing it. We'll have our beats and we'll say, okay, this happened, but then this happens, and that affects this, and that does to that, and that's why you get a show that feels like, okay, this to that, to this to that, but this, here's the complication, to that. And there's so many scripts we read from new writers and things that we see.
God, I see movies.
And
you see movies that you're just watching. It's like this happened, and then this happens, and then this happens. That's when you're in a movie, just going, "What the f am I watching this movie for?" And just like this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. That's not a movie, you know. That's not a story. Like Trey said, it's those two, but because therefore, that gives you the causation between each beat, and that makes that's a story.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, back to slides. So this resonated with me because like that is the defining trait of a bad answer to tell me about yourself. To me, it's the and thens. I worked at this company and then I moved to this company and then I switched jobs and then I did that. Like, whoa, you're skipping over all the interesting stuff and making sure that you spend a lot of time on the really boring stuff that was already in your resume. Like changing jobs is stressful. Why did you do that? Why did you change companies? Like, give me the good stuff. I'm trying to get to know you. So we're trying to form rapport with our interviewer. We want to make sure that we focus on the whys. So the format that I'm going to teach you is based directly from this. Each beat of your answer to tell me about yourself should be separated by a but or a therefore. So the technique that I recommend using is called FIT. So F stands for favorite part, I is for the insight gain, T is for the transition that you made. So I'll show you how it works in practice here. It's a fill in the blank framework that focuses you on your whys rather than your whats. Nice thing about it is there's nothing really to memorize. There's a few elements there we can talk about, but really it's something where you'll largely do this improv style each time, but you're going to follow the framework. That way it helps ensure that you deliver a quality answer each time that has your natural energy, whether it's like extroverted, like gregariousness, or introverted intensity. Okay. So I'll just use an example from my life. My favorite part of chemical engineering was learning to break big problems into smaller pieces. But if it were the perfect job, I would have stayed in chemical engineering forever, and it was not. But so I need an insight. I need a but that allows me to make that sets up. I wanted to do something differently or do something more of something. So in my answer, I would say, but I wanted to apply that rigorous logic to a wider variety of challenges. So I transitioned into strategy consulting with A.T. Kearney. So that all makes sense. Like my favorite part of the job was this, but here's the gap that I wanted to fill. Here's the how I wanted to make my career even better. So I made a rational, logical move. And then I could say, well, my favorite part about being a business analyst at a strategy consulting firm was, but I realized I want to have more client interaction. So when I was offered a promotion to senior business analyst, I happily accepted. Everything makes sense. I'm going through the whys, not the whats. But as I relate my favorites, you get to know me as a person, what motivates me. That word favorite is very specific on purpose, and we'll talk about the magic that is favorite very shortly. So your transition could be that you changed organizations, you took a promotion, you returned to school, or just decided to get more involved in a different club. Really, it's up to you. So we're gonna just use we're gonna practice this. So just use your favorite. I would say use your most recent transition. So some of you are still in school, you haven't done your first internships yet. I want you to go through that happy hour again. Let's say you're at your internship or you're at that happy hour. The CEO walks up to your group and says, "Tell me about yourself." Just use your most recent kind of involvement, a club involvement or extracurricular or internship if you've had one already. But I'm going to give you the same 30 seconds. This time, I just want you to talk through this, fill in the blanks. What was your favorite part about that most recent role? What's the insight that you had, and what's the transition you're looking to make? Your 30 seconds starts now. Okay, that's time. How did that one go in the chat box? Better, worse, or about the same? And why? How did it make you feel compared to the other one? A lot smoother. Great. Amanda, thank you for sharing. Great, Noel says. Thank you. Easier. Good. Oh, thank you. Chloe and Grace. Caleb. Better. Excellent. What about it made it easier, better, smoother? Organization. Amanda, I'm right there with you. Yeah, filling the blanks. I can think less about how I'm going to present information and just think about like genuinely what was my favorite part of the job. Every time I tell a fit story, my favorite part changes based on the mood I'm in the moment. Like I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just genuinely, this is the favorite thing I recall from that role. Easier to pinpoint your thoughts. Yeah, you're constrained. You just need to fill in the blank. You don't need to like organize the thought and like shape it. The less thought, cognitive energy going into shaping your answer, more into delivering a true answer well. So it flowed naturally. Yeah, there's a natural sequence of events. You enjoyed it, but you thought you could enjoy something else even more. Speaking more meaningfully, Noel, I love that. It's a genuine why. It's like they're not going to have any other time in the interview to get that information from you. Like you like that job, but why did you change? Like, what are you looking to do with your career? So it's a really nice way to use disclosure to build intimacy and likability with your interviewer, and that's really what this is about. We want them to be on our side. So confirmation bias works for us rather than against us. Confirmation bias is a psychology term. Basically, when we make first impressions very quickly, we decide if we like something or someone quickly, and if we like them initially, we tend to overlook reasons why not to like them because it's dissonant in our head. It disagrees. It's hard to reconcile disagreeing, conflicting information. So we'll screen it out until it becomes overwhelming. But if they don't like you initially, confirmation bias works against you, and you have to work extra hard to convince them. Actually, no, open your mind back up. I'm a decent person. Okay, great. Yeah, I didn't feel the need to keep rambling. It's very like, oh, just finish your thought and move to the next part. Yeah, a bit personal, a bit professional, but great. Yeah, you're answering questions. I love that. You're answering questions they didn't think to ask, but you're giving them information in a likable way. You knew the facts, so there's nothing to memorize. You can just kind of rattle through it. Now, in an interview, you'll talk for about 2 minutes. So you'll start with one fit and go right into your next fit. In a happy hour sort of setting or a group setting where your answer is going to be shorter, you'll just get through one fit, probably your most recent one. Okay, great. Thank you for indulging that. Okay, so here's a few points about fits. Honest fits are the best fits. So don't. I often get asked, should I tailor my favorites to be things that will help me in the job? Anytime I've seen someone try to do this, the authenticity element is lost. They put a lot of work into it, and it feels fake. So the authenticity is what makes the answer pretty likable. So we just want to be honest. What was our favorite part? Sometimes it is and I'm fine with that. If your favorite part of the job was just the financial comfort that it provided you as you're trying to pay off your academic debts, say that. That's totally fine. I'd rather you tell the truth well rather than be embarrassed about it or just be dishonest. So pick one favorite per fit. You can't have like 2 or 3 or 5 favorites because then it's not a favorite anymore. It has to be a superlative. So just pick your favorite in that moment and go with it. Don't try to sell yourself and don't try to memorize these fully. If you want to memorize something, it's probably going to be the insight that you gained because sometimes we have bad work experiences. I definitely did. So here's a true statement that is framed poorly. I found chemical engineering tedious and repetitive. True statement. I could never say that in an interview. The way I would say it in an interview would be like how I did in the example. But I wanted a wider variety of projects. I wanted to apply that rigorous logic to a wider variety of challenges. So framing insights positively. What are you running towards? What are you seeking more of rather than what are you running away from or seeking less of? That you may need to memorize if the experience itself is not a satisfying or positive one. But everything else you can kind of talk through on the fly and just be honest in the moment, whatever your favorite part of that role was. Okay. Now, you may not want to dive right into your first fit. You'll have probably an opener sentence where you were working at the time, or even just a broader statement about yourself to help them catch up on your life. So here are a few example openers. Basically, what I like to think is start wherever your hero's journey began. When did you start on this current path of yours? So for some people, it will be in childhood. I'm originally from Lagos, and I've always loved numbers. Okay, frame up, like this is going to be a theme. This is just, numbers are important to me. Or my earliest passion was performance, and that led me to study theater at Carnegie Mellon. Okay, great. That starts in college. Or could start even after you graduate. Immediately upon graduation, I found myself in the world of Bay Area tech startups. So really, however you want to start, where you want to start, it's really up to you. But if it's something that gives you energy to talk about, that was a formative experience, talk about that. That brings people closer to you when you disclose genuine information, genuine, meaningful information, your whys, not your whats. The whats are in your resume. Give them some other content that they haven't seen before. I often get reservations, like, is there another word I can use for favorite? So when you're in an interview, you'll be expected to answer for 2 minutes. Tell me about yourself. You'll have some people who say you can go 3 minutes, that's fine. You'll have other people who say, no, you can't go 3 minutes, 2 minutes max. Same with, you can go 1 minute, that's fine. 2 minutes for every answer. I just want you to get used to every answer that you give in an interview landing at 2 minutes. You'll start to form a clock in your head for what 2 minutes feels like. So just to ensure we alienate nobody, keep your answers to 2 minutes. So you may get through, I've seen people get through 8 or 9 fits in a single tell me about yourself answer. For people that have a lot of experience, you just don't have time to really go into more detail about your favorite or your insight. So people sometimes are like, well, wouldn't it get weird if I just keep using the word favorite over and over? Let me give you an example. Here's the reason favorite is the specific word I recommend. Only one of these 3 statements is going to be true. But I guarantee you that one of these 3 statements is true. So put your logic hat on here. Which one of these 3 statements is true to me? I really enjoy cleaning the toilet. I'm passionate about cleaning the toilet. My favorite chore is cleaning the toilet. 1, 2, or 3, which one is the true statement? We need more pure logic questions in workshops these days, I think. 4, nice. Yeah, no, one of them is true. I like where your head's at. Got a 3, a 2, some 3s, another 2, another 2. Okay, great. So most of you got the trick here. So for those of you who said 3, you are correct. How could that possibly be true? Guarantee I don't enjoy cleaning the toilet. What is the logical loophole that I use here? I don't enjoy chores, but I can have a favorite one. It's the one I hate the least. Thank you, Abhinav. That's exactly it. It's the least negative number. So I don't like any chores because I'd rather not do chores. But if I have to pick a chore, it's going to be the one that takes minimal time and has maximum visual impact. And that's what cleaning the toilet to me is. So that's my favorite chore. Often when people express reservations about using the word favorite, the things they will want to substitute favorite for actually are much harder to substantiate. I would argue I can deliver the phrase with a flat affect. My favorite chore is cleaning the toilet. I don't need to sell you on it. I'm giving you a true statement. But if I start saying things that imply it's not my the best worst thing, it's not the least hated. Now, if I start saying things that imply I have positive feelings toward this, and that's what 1 and 2 both do, I would have to start selling you on it. I really enjoy cleaning the toilet. Like I need to deliver affect to make it a credible, believable statement, even though it's not true. And that's, you want to be truthful in your interviews. And if passionate's even worse, like if I can say my favorite chore is cleaning the toilet, like that's my least hated chore. I'm passionate about cleaning the toilet. Okay, here's 0. I have to, there's some positive feelings, but going from really enjoying to passionate, like you really have to sell that. Who's passionate about cleaning the toilet? That's crazy. So the common substitutes that people want to use instead of favorite are harder to substantiate. They're not authentic. They're not honest. So I would say no. We like pop songs because they get to the chorus in the first 30 seconds, and the act of recognizing that pattern is inherently likable. That's the one constant in music throughout time and cultures is repetition. Now, if you wanted to, would either of these two framings work as an alternative? Instead of favorite, saying what I enjoyed most or what I really enjoyed, would either of those be an acceptable alternative to favorite? Either, both, or neither? Take a guess. Enjoyed most, Abhinav, you're dialed in. That's going to be the one we go with. So really enjoyed actually is just a reformulation of option number 1, but enjoyed most is a superlative. So it's you can hate the thing the least. I enjoyed most. It didn't mean I technically enjoyed it, but I enjoyed it most. That would be the closest thing you could come up to an acceptable as an acceptable alternative. It keeps you in a superlative. You can only have one, and it's a safer statement than saying really enjoyed or passionate. Okay. In general, just using a superlative, picking that, it's more interesting. It's also more authentic and concise. So rather than listing off the 4 things you liked, your impact is going to diminish pretty quickly. Oh, you could have named anything about that job, but here's the one thing that really I loved most about it. I love the task variety. Like, oh, that's so interesting. I would have follow-up questions, or it makes me feel like I got to know you. But you lose that benefit if you start laundry listing 3 or 4 things. So just keep it to one favorite and move forward in the story. Now, at the end of the answer, you may want to try to stick the landing. I strongly recommend that you do. And by stick the landing, I mean tee up the next question in the interview because we want a specific question next. Your final fit should tease the role or milestone you're seeking next. So here's what mine would look like in an interview for marketing. My favorite part of being a consultant was building rapport with my client teams, but I wanted to have a more consistent home team I could work with over a longer period of time. So I returned to business school in order to pursue a career in marketing. What's the question I want next, do you think? What am I trying to encourage them to ask me next? There's a couple different answers here, but they're in the same genre. Close to goals, but generally it's going to be, anyone else have a guess? Do you feel that you accomplished that goal? Nope, not quite. It's going to be the why questions. I want why marketing or why our company to be the question that they answer next. Often it's going to be in their list of questions for you. This makes it feel more like a conversation when you stick the landing in the closing. Basically, you mention, you kind of dangle marketing out there. So I returned to school in order to pursue a career in marketing. And I happen to be interviewing with a marketing firm at this very moment when I give them this answer. We want why marketing next. Okay. So let's close out Tell Me About Yourself and move to the why questions. Fit helps interviewers get to know you through your career decisions. It's easy. The easiest way to maintain the energy of small talk into your interview itself is going to be to use Fit. Share information that's genuinely meaningful to you. That way your natural energy comes out. You remain likable. Your energy doesn't go up after Tell Me About Yourself. And very rarely do we get 2 minutes to talk about ourselves uninterrupted anyway. So enjoy this one, but keep your energy up. And Fit just helps you tell a true story well, so that you're not starting from scratch and panicking and debating what you should cover. It's just a really nice diagnostic to fall back on. Okay, so why questions typically come next. So why this role, why this organization, why this sector? Collectively, I call those first four questions the big four. Because they account for 77% of the decisions made during the interview. Like, they are disproportionately important. And the reason we get asked these questions is to make sure that we understand the transaction of getting hired by this company from both our perspective and theirs. It's a two-part question. Why do you want to work for our company? They don't say the second part. The second part is, and why should our company want to work with you? They don't say that part, though. So you have to kind of fill in the blanks when you answer this question, and having a good framework helps you do that. So I do a lot of mock interviews. I often hear, like, if I'm helping someone interview for a big tech company, one of the reasons I often get is, well, you're the first reason is you're the market leader. Is that a good answer in the chat box? Yeah, I'm right there with you, Abhinav. No, I don't think it's very good. Why is it not very good? It's incomplete. Yeah, I mean, it's really tough to, like, often when people use this, there's just nothing to say after you. First reason is you're the market leader. Like, you're well respected in the marketplace, and I want to work for a company like that. It's like vapid. There's nothing there. And they already know they're the leader, so it's not adding that much value. Yeah, it's very basic. Chloe, yeah, exactly right. So you could, like, you'd have to really do a lot of legwork to turn this into an acceptable answer. So I would say, in general, move away from you're the market leader as an answer to your interview questions. So if this is a bad answer, how do we construct a good one? Hopefully you're ready for some good news. You've already learned how to do this. RAC, it works for why questions in your interview, just as it did for cover letters. So you don't have to learn a new framework here. We're just going to talk briefly about how to adapt reason, anecdote, connection for answering why questions in an interview. So why do you want this job, or why do you want to work for our company, is what we're being asked, instead of why should we hire you, which is what the question underlying the cover letter situation is. So my first reason, so in general, I recommend, like, giving them the structure of your answer up front. I'm a big fan of the rule of three. So a list of 4 is too long and a list of 2 is too few. So there are 3 main reasons why I want to work in this role or work at your company. My first reason is blank. The nice thing about telling them how many reasons we have is, when we finish the first reason within about 40 seconds, they can relax a little bit. They know the rest of your answer will be done probably in 2 minutes. So 40 seconds times 3, it's about 2 minutes long. Great. Okay, you're not going to go on for 5 minutes and kidnap the interview. So my first reason is blank. Instead of writing it in bold, we just say my first reason is. Now we'll back it up with an anecdote. This reason is true or important to me, to us, because, and you work in an anecdote. Why do you care that they have a great culture? Why do you care that it's a collegial environment? Or why is it important? But the most important part is that connection. And this is optional. You don't always have to do it if the benefit to the company is clear. But if you're going to say something like, it's the culture, I really want to work for a company because of the culture, like, that's kind of a cliche. You're gonna really need to show you understand, how are you going to give back to our culture? Why do we want you to? Like, I know everybody likes to work in collegial environments, but why should we want you in that collegial environment? So this knowledge will help me to do blank part of the job better. So if you know firm building is really important at that company, that's something that you could suggest there. So if I were to try to sell, I think the market leader could be made to work, but it needs a very specific sort of circumstance. So here's how I might answer. Here's how I might try to justify a rack answer built around you're the market leader. Why do I want to work for the big tech company? Well, there are 3 reasons. My first reason is resources. My whole career, I've worked at a series of startups where we had to scrap for every dollar and every hour of time that we could get. It often meant that professional development wasn't heavily prioritized, and it was tough to get. one of the big appealing factors of joining your company is the infrastructure you have. For example, the Blue Sky program that you put in place to help ensure that people regularly get smarter. I think if I were to join your company, not only would I take full advantage of those professional development opportunities, but I also eagerly give back in firm development by becoming an instructor myself on topics like business analytics and similar ones that I know well. Okay, so we're letting them know, okay, market leadership is great, but like it's really the professional development opportunities. I guess you're the market leader, basically they have, pardon me, I just totally, I flubbed that. First reason is you're the market leader. My whole career, I've been scrappy and worked at startups. The reason I want to work for the market leader is because I would take advantage of your more consistent resourcing for professional development and give back to that as an instructor myself. So fully appreciate the fact that market leaders can have great professional development. You can see it's a tricky thing. You need to word it pretty specifically. It's basically state your reason, back it up with an anecdote, a story, but then tell them why it's a win-win. What do they get out of it as well? So the more popular or cliched your reason is, the more connections needed. So here's a written example. So why Darlington? Why do you want to be a marketer at an electronics company named Darlington? I have three main reasons. The first is my lifelong passion for home electronics. Passion is always a tricky one. Like, ooh, this can go badly. So we need to back it up with an anecdote. I got the Darlington Super Pro gaming system in grade school, which got me interested in electronics early. I started reading industry blogs, debating new electronics merits with friends, and even listening on investors' calls. So nobody else could say that anecdote. That's purely just me that could do that. So it's ownable. But what does Darlington get out of my passion for electronics? That's the connection. I think my history of following home electronics trends and discussing them with fellow fanatics would help me effectively communicate with not just consumers, but also the engineers who design Darlington's products and the sales teams who take them to market. So whether you're a marketer or a product manager, you're going to need to do that. So passion is helpful. It helps you talk the talk and keep up to date on trends. So that's kind of the structure. That's how you turn RAC into an interview answer. So what did the candidate accomplish here in the chat box by using RAC? What benefits does using that framework seem to bestow to this job seeker? Showcase their value. Thank you, Noel. Yeah, here's a benefit to you. I would say only a fraction of job seekers actually say, here's what you, the company, get out of hiring me. And again, this is easier than ever. You can go to ChatGPT, ask what 10 projects would I need to do as a person in this job for that company, and you fill those in as a possible connection. My organization abilities would be helpful, for example, on this kind of a project that I know you need done. That shows dedication and knowledge. Yeah, it just, you know what you're raising your hand to do, like you know the work involved, and you did the extra homework and showed the deference and to frame it for them so they didn't have to search for the meaning in your answer. Yeah, genuine story. It made them seem valuable. So they're still being honest with their interviewer, and that's so important. We don't want to lose the goodwill from a good answer to tell me about yourself and good small talk. Okay, let's close this section out. There are no right reasons. I'm often asked, like, yeah, I know I need to practice this more, but were the reasons okay? There's no right or wrong reasons. It's really how well you justify your reasons. So don't stress about your reasons. Just worry about whether you have an anecdote to back up that reason and whether you can connect it back to why the company will benefit. So substantiate your reasons with a personal anecdote to ensure your answer is differentiated, and offer connections so the employers know what you're getting yourself into. Okay. So let's talk about behavioral questions. You probably learned a technique called STAR or CAR to answer, tell me about a time where you led a team. I want to go a little bit beyond those, though, but here's why interviewers ask them. They ask those questions to make sure you have the required skills and toughness and history to complete difficult projects on the job. They'll also ask you case questions, which measure if you have the required technical proficiency, if it's like a programming role. or like in investment banking or consulting. Those are deep topics that we don't have time to cover with any justification or with any kind of credibility here. There are books on specialty case interviewing for various job functions. So we're going to skip that and candidate questions as well. If you want more information on candidate questions, we can talk about it at the end. But it's also mentioned in the job closure of the book if you check it out at the library. I just really want to focus on the behavioral questions for now, because that usually forms the majority of the remainder of the 23% that are up for grabs in the last 15 minutes of an interview. So the unique thing about behavioral questions is that career coaches generally agree on how to answer them. We like CAR, we like STAR, basically the same thing, except one is challenge, action, result, and the other one's situation, task, action, result. I like challenge, action, result because it's simpler. It's tough explaining what the task means to most people. It's just tough to get. So CAR stories should be 2 minutes in length like every other answer. Your why answer should be 2 minutes. Your tell me about yourself should be 2 minutes in an interview. Your CAR story should be as well. Your first 20 seconds should be a simple explanation of your situation. The middle 80 seconds should be what you, not your team, did to solve the challenge, your actions. And then 20 seconds would be your quantitative or qualitative proof that you did this well. So you reduced risk. You don't have numbers. Sometimes you just did it to reduce risk. Do you have any qualitative proof that you reduced risk? If so, put that out there. But you have to talk about why the company paid you to do this. Okay, I want to move beyond the basics though. This is table stakes. There are a few techniques that are not commonly taught that I want to make sure you have access to. So the challenge has to cut to the chase quickly. For any of my engineers out there, this is a distillation column. Here is a brief description of what a distillation column does. Distillation columns are all over the place in chemical engineering. Distillation column is the major piece of equipment used to distill. I'm already falling asleep because it's terribly boring. You don't want me to talk through this. If I'm telling you what a distillation column does, I am losing this interview question because it's tedious. So we need to cut to the chase quickly. So if you find yourself getting stuck in the weeds on your background to your challenge, raise it up a level. Cut the background, keep the level of difficulty. Why was this a hard project? We want to keep that information in. Cut anything that's general. Just say I had an important piece of equipment that malfunctioned. I don't need to go into the fact that it's called a distillation column and it separates vapors from into different concentrations. So here are some examples of brief, appropriate challenges. Management gave us an aggressive growth target. I had to figure out how we could achieve it. Don't need any of the background. Just keep it very simple. A client threatened to fire us. I had to find a way to keep them despite being new to the project. Didn't need to go into why the client was threatening to fire you. If you do, then it tends to get very long. We spend more time on the setup rather than our actions. The actions are what get us hired. Due to a schedule change, I had to deliver a project in half the normal amount of time. Okay, that's why this is going to be an impressive story that I'm about to tell you. Okay, so great car stories have structured actions. So what does that mean? Sometimes you can naturally come up with 3 steps that you took to develop 3 actions that you took to solve a project. Because again, that rule of 3, lists of 3 are easy to listen to. They're easy to follow. Just let them know that you have a structure up front though. There are 3 main steps that I took to address this challenge. Could be 4, could be 2, but I find 3 is a nice sweet spot. Now there may be 10 steps that you took to solve the challenge. So what you could do, you could pick, if you have many of those projects and you're going to tell that different stories in that same genre a few times, maybe you can pick 3 of the actions to highlight in one story and 3 different actions to highlight in a different one. Alternatively, I like the ready-to-eat structure. I find that most challenges that we face can be broken into 3 phases. So ready-to-eat RTE formula. I think most of our interview stories can be broken into the following 3 phases. First, understand the problem. This is the research phase. Step 2, design a solution. This is the creative, strategic phase. And phase 3, implement the solution. This is our interpersonal leadership skills phase, collaboration. So I'm going to show you a diagrammed example of how this looks. If you just say there are 3 main steps I took to address this challenge, first I had to understand the problem. Now we can bullet point, we can laundry list tactics within that genre that we used. And this is an example. I had a project to reduce a financial metric for a big electronics company. So DSO was the metric I had to reduce. So my challenge was to reduce a metric that Wall Street said was too high, despite not having any finance experience myself. To solve this, I took 3 main actions. First, I had to understand the problem. So to do that, I consulted my internal DSO and financial experts at my consulting firm. I also interviewed my client's internal sales agents to learn their understanding of the challenge and what was keeping them from improving their performance. And I reviewed their existing client contracts to see if I could identify any systemic reasons why this number might be too high. So set up, I'm understanding the problem. I can laundry list. There could be 3 or 4 or 5 items. I just talk about them more quickly. Now, if any one of those things didn't work, I had 2 or 3 others. So I had backup. So if any one of those tactics didn't work, the plan was not destroyed. Second step I took was to design a solution. So to do this, I started out by identifying the best existing contract of all the ones that I reviewed. And then I modified it to include all the best practices identified through my other steps of research. Third step I took was to implement the solution. So first, I gained the support of my supervisor as well as my client leads to make sure that I had their support and incorporated their feedback. Secondly, I created an Excel wizard to ensure that new contracts were okay just by plugging in the specifications of the contract itself to simplify approval. And third, I demonstrated the wizard for the client sales agents so that they felt more comfort in how to use this new tool. As a result, the client's metric was forecast to drop 20% by year 1, doubling their target, and by 50% by year 5. I also won a cash award for intellectual capital for this work. Okay, so most of our time is spent talking through our actions. The results include a quantitative piece and a qualitative piece that demonstrate I was probably okay at this. But this is a way to visualize many of your interview answers. It brings structure to something that can feel a little overwhelming or hard to organize. Okay. So RTE structure is one great tool. Another great tool is the CAR matrix. Huge fan of this one. It's an interview strategy document. So it's an Excel spreadsheet. You can download it just by clicking that or by going to that link right there, thejobcloser.com/resources. What the CAR matrix is it's a spreadsheet that helps you deploy your interview stories, your CAR stories, as effectively and efficiently as possible. The way that we do that is we add our stories along rows on the left, and we add questions we're expecting to hear in the columns along the top. And if a particular interview story that we have, you might have 8 of them at this point in your career. If you have 8 interview stories, if that story could be used to answer a particular question you would expect might be asked in an interview, you can mark it with an X. If it's really good at answering that question, you can mark it with a double X, just so you know, okay, this is a great story. And generally, you're going to want to put your best stories closest to the top of the CAR matrix, because these are the ones you'll tell most frequently. What the CAR matrix will help you do is deploy your best stories first. You don't know how many CAR stories they're going to ask, so it's to your advantage to use your best stories first. Puts your best foot forward. The CAR matrix also helps you identify, is there any question I'm likely to get that I don't have an interview story ready for? If so, I need to think about how I can refashion one of my current stories or come up with a new story to make sure I answer that question about a time where I had a conflict with a teammate, for example. So you'll use your best 3 to 5 stories early and every time, and you'll reserve 5 to 10 other ones for specific questions, like or backups. If you only had 2, if like your favorite story that you usually use here, you've already used it in the interview. It's good to have a backup. But especially for negative questions, like what's an ethical dilemma that you faced, or tell me about your biggest weakness. Like those are ones where you may want to have a specific story saved for that, and you only tell that CAR story when you're asked that specific question. And then once you're done with the interview season, you can just go back in, look at what stories you told in your interviews, put them into ChatGPT, and ask them to turn it into a resume bullet point. So again, it does the work for you. ChatGPT is really, really good at this. If it starts with a story, it can condense information down very effectively. It's just not good when you start with it. So start with your stories for your interview season and back solve them, put them into ChatGPT, and turn those into bullet points. Okay. So what about surprising or novel behavioral questions? You will get questions you weren't expecting, you didn't prepare for, you didn't have listed in your CAR matrix. How should we handle them? I would say first and foremost, ask for a moment to think. You're entitled to, you've got a lot of information in your head. So say first, that's an interesting question. Can I take a moment to think about it? They'll say yes. And think about it. If you can come up with a story that you've told before, great, tell that one. If you cannot come up with a story that you've told before, do not tell a story for the first time in an interview. I've never seen people do it effectively. The timing's off, the content you share is not helpful, you disclose too much information, it just generally doesn't reflect well. So I'm going to give you an alternative approach. If you don't have an aha moment where you think of a story that would fit here that you've already told, tell your best practiced CAR story that you haven't told yet. So one of your 3 to 5 heavy rotation stories that you almost always tell in every interview. Tell that story. And the reason I want you to do that is that way, but plan to save 15 seconds at the end. We'll improvise for those last 15 seconds, but it buys you about 105 seconds to tell a story that you know well, that's flattering to you, that you really like. That's a better alternative, just to improvise for 15 seconds a couple minutes from now, rather than improvising for the full 2 minutes, which is what you'd be doing if you were telling a brand new story for the first time. So don't do it. Tell that best practice car story, because generally we're doing some combination of leading, collaborating, solving tough problems, and getting things done. Those 4 buckets of work, we're doing some combination of all 4 of those things on every project that we excel in. So refresh your memory on this particular story. It may give you an idea for how to end the answer, because we're going to save 15 seconds at the end for a takeaway, making this a cart story. So after you've told your results, you'll recap the question. The reason this is my favorite example of, for example, overcoming adversity, if that was the question they sprung on you, is because, and now you improvise for that last 15 seconds. So you revisit the question they asked, so they know that you were genuinely listening, but now you've bought yourself a couple minutes to brainstorm. Like, you can find some kind of element of the story you just told where you had to overcome adversity, because work is adversity by definition. So just pick out a fact, talk about it for 15 seconds. That way you're not improvising for a full 2 minutes. Save takeaways. Takeaways can be a little overwhelming if you have them for every car story that you tell. So I would say make sure that you use that. You don't need to use them all the time, but make sure you have them for unexpected questions like overcoming adversity if you weren't expecting it. Superlative questions like, what's your proudest accomplishment? It's nice to be able to finish those off with, the reason this is my proudest accomplishment is because, and just again, revisit the question, put a cap on the answer. And negatively framed questions, which we're going to talk about on the next slide. What's your biggest weakness? Tell me about a time where you failed. Tell me about an ethical dilemma that you faced. Takeaways are really helpful for these. So here's 2 strategies for those negative questions: weakness, failure, ethical dilemma questions. Option 1 is to have a car story that you only tell for those questions. Sometimes you have that disaster that happened in your life, and you worked really hard and you recovered, and the show went on and you did well anyway. If you have that story, absolutely tell it. That's a dream scenario. I had a colleague who taught this topic who had one of those stories, and it was like, oh, how do I compete with that? I don't have that story. So if you have that story, great. If you don't have that story, don't stress. Here's what I'd recommend doing. Turn your car story into a scar story. Add a setback to an existing car story. So setback would be something like this. Early in my career, I failed to get client buy-in before a big presentation. They were not happy. They had a lot of feedback, and that led to tension and a lot of lost time on the project. Thankfully, I had a shot at redemption on my next project when I had to reduce a financial metric for a client despite having no finance background. Now we pivoted into a story that we know very well. Got it fully diagrammed. It fits the RTE format. Like, we're ready to go with this one. It's a very flattering story. So they asked me for a failure or that I had. Absolutely. I failed. That doesn't mean we have to talk about the failure for 2 minutes. We can address it directly in our first 15 seconds. You're early in your career. I messed up a bunch early in my career. It's kind of the norm as we get to more professional seasoning. So acknowledge the failure, talk about how you had a shot at success on a subsequent project or in a different part of your life. If you're asked for, so this is if you're asked for a weakness, you can be fully recovered. So next time I got client buy-in and had a great project, reduced DSO by 50%. However, if they ask me for a weakness, I can't just end on a note where I'm fully recovered, because it would no longer be a weakness for me if I was fully recovered. So if they ask for a weakness instead of a failure, we need to criticize our performance a little bit by adding a takeaway. So make this a SCART story. So we need to talk about why we're a work in progress. So in the last example, I would say I reduced the DSO by 50% and won a cash award for intellectual capital. However, a lot of the change management that I guided was through in-person meetings, and I know that got on the nerves of some of my client teammates. So on my next project, I look forward to using more virtual check-in tools like Slack, standing meetings, in lieu of one-on-one 30-minute meetings to get this done more efficiently and more conscientiously of people's time. Okay, so I'm still a work in progress. I'm not perfect at getting buy-in, but I know what I'm going to work on next. So having a takeaway for that kind of question is really, really helpful. Any questions about those behavioral questions? Okay, let's close this out. We'll have some time for questions at the end. We've got a couple of quick post-interview topics to cover. But behavioral questions in closing, get organized. So RT, ready to eat structure, helps you put order on all of your stories if you want it. CAR matrix helps you remember your stories. My tip to you, if you have a CAR matrix and you practice your stories and you find this really nice way of saying part of your story, phrasing your action or summarizing your challenge, write that quote down in quotation marks, write it word for word in your CAR matrix. You may not forget the story next year when you're interviewing again, if you're done interviewing this year, but you will forget the nice way you had of wording it. So write down the effective wordings that you come up with word for word so that you don't forget them next year or in a later iteration of interviewing. Don't dwell on the negative if they ask you for a failure or a weakness. Instead, highlight a failure or a weakness, but pivot to a positive, well-practiced CAR story and just include a takeaway at the end. All CAR stories should have results, and qualitative results are totally okay. Sometimes you do it to increase satisfaction on the team. You can't put a number to that. You can't put a financial amount to that. Sometimes you do it to reduce risk or to be compliant with the law. Like, you have to do those things. They just need to get done, but make sure that you have some result. Why did your company pay you to do this? Okay, 2 quick topics that are not often given a lot of attention, but it can be incredibly important for getting a good offer and converting your internship offers to full-time opportunities. Okay, let's talk first about negotiating. The question should not be for any of you, should I negotiate? The question should be, how do I negotiate? Absolutely, you all need to negotiate. If I hire 10 people for my company and only one of those 10 negotiates their offer, that one person is the one who's getting my most important projects. If I can't trust you to advocate for yourself, there's no way I can trust you to advocate for my company. So it just it makes them feel better about the purchase that they made to extend you an offer. So you are going to negotiate, and you're going to do it in a thoughtful, conscientious way that will enhance your brand as you get into your job. If there are horror stories about people having their offers yanked from trying to negotiate, typically they went about the offer in an inappropriate way, or it was a company that was a little bit, shall we say, in startup mode, not very well organized and not maybe the most conscientious or ethical organization. Because negotiating, research shows both sides feel better when there's some movement on an offer before both sides accept. If you were to immediately accept the offer they extended you, they're going to question, did we pay you too much? So help them feel better about the purchase. Key point here, negotiation should always be by phone or Zoom, never by email. Invariably, when I've had students who try to negotiate by email, that email gets ignored and the deadline gets closer and closer until you're forced to make a decision because you never heard back from that email. Like, that's the worst case scenario. You ask over email to reduce your stress, but it only increases your stress because you don't hear back. Plus, it gives them all the time in the world to negotiate, like organize their strategy for negotiating against you. But usually they'll just ignore you until the deadline arrives and just say, oh, I didn't see your email. So what you will do is you'll send them an email saying, I have some questions about the offer, or I have an update regarding my status. Can you please chat for a phone call? They will, if you're vague, they will immediately follow up with you and say, yes, let's chat. I recommend that this first conversation is what I call pre-negotiation call, or a PNC. We use this conversation not to negotiate. There will be no negotiating on this call, so it's the easiest call in the world for you, because all you're going to be doing is asking them the same question over and over and listening really well to their answers. We're going to use this call to identify flexibility in their offer before we actually negotiate in a separate later call, a day or two later. So this is something where you would start this process a week before your deadline. Now, the pre-negotiation call is built around this particular phrase. What flexibility do you have around blank? How much flexibility do you have on salary? And then we listen to their answer. What sort of flexibility do you have around signing bonus? What kind of flexibility do you have on relocation bonus? So every element of the offer, vacation time, etc. So every element of the offer that they lay out, you'll ask them what flexibility they have. If they say, we don't have any flexibility on salary, that means they don't have any flexibility on salary. If they are definitive and they give you a very firm, unequivocal answer, nope, no flexibility on salary. All of our cohorts started at the same level. Great, we know that this is not a topic we want to spend time trying to negotiate on when it's time for the real thing. So you can just kind of note, okay, no flexibility. If they say, we might have some, but we don't have much flexibility on salary, that means they have flexibility on salary. So this absolutely should be a topic that you bring in on your actual negotiation. Now, they will try to get you to negotiate. They'll say how much you're looking for. Just say, I'm not ready to talk specific numbers at this point. I'm just trying to better understand the offer itself. So thank you for your time. And then we go back to how much flexibility do you have around vacation time? I see here you said they have 2 weeks of vacation time here. Well, how much flexibility do you have on that? And we lather, rinse, repeat this process for each element of the offer. Once we're done, we take some time to think about it. Now we know which items are in play and which are not. Then we set up a separate call for the actual negotiation. Now, during the actual negotiation, I recommend having a because for any ask that you plan on making. So a very famous study by Ellen Langer, she, in the 70s, went to a busy office building and had her experimenters try to cut into line for a photocopier. Back in the day, we had to put everything into hard copy paper, very wasteful. But there would be lines for a copier, and at big office buildings, those copiers would be shared. So there could be a line. So the experimenter would go up and they try 3 different circumstances to see how frequently they were successful at getting a stranger to allow them to cut to the front of the line. They would say, excuse me, can I cut in line? That had a 60% success rate. That was the control. Then they tried a second formulation. They said, excuse me, can I cut in line because I'm in a rush? That increased the success rate up to 94%. So more than 50% better, or more than half better than the control case. Then they tried making sort of a nonsense request, like their because changed to something that was obvious. So it became this, excuse me, can I cut in line for the copier because I need to make copies? Obviously, why else would anyone get in line to use a photocopier? But the success rate was 93%, so basically the same as when you were in a rush. The important thing was that you had a because. As human beings, we are wired. If somebody attempts to give us a justification for their actions, we're likely to roll with it, especially if it's a stranger. We don't have any other context on them. So sure, but you need to make copies. Oh, obviously, yeah, if you're asking to do this, there must be a good reason. So anything that you plan on asking for, have a because for it. That way, so when you get to the negotiation, now you say, I have some questions about the offer. Can we chat again? You can say, I have some more specific questions about the offer for your second call if you're concerned. But they'll hop on the phone with you and you'll say, okay, what can you move it all on the salary? I've got a budget I'm trying to adhere to, and having additional salary would help me achieve that. All right, I'm having a timeline, a budget that I'm trying to adhere to pay down my debt in a certain amount of time. An increase in salary would help a lot there. It invites them to be your partner. How can they help you solve that underlying problem of debt? And it may not be through increasing your salary. It may be forgiving some of your federal debt. It may be through other deferred payments. Like there are other ways they can handle this. So it just makes them see themselves as a partner in negotiation rather than an adversary. Do you have any flexibility around signing bonus? This would be really helpful because I'm hoping to make this a long-term commitment to your organization and your location. I'd like to put a down payment on a condo. This really helped me do that. So again, shows respect. It makes them see you as a partner rather than an adversary. It doesn't really matter how great the because is. It just matters that you have one for best results. And some employers do have a rule that they can't offer you improvements to the offer until you ask for them. So you do have to be prepared to make the ask. Again, they will feel better that you negotiated. You'll feel better because you have a better offer. So everybody wins here. I'm frankly disappointed by candidates that don't. So don't do that to yourself. Practice this skill. I know it might feel uncomfortable right now, but like the stakes will go up dramatically for needing to negotiate in the future. Like get comfortable with it now while the stakes are low, so you're ready to go in the future. Frankly, when you view them as a partner rather than an adversary, it makes this much easier. In the job closer, I have a much more developed, I have 20 or so pages on negotiating that picks from other negotiating books that I like. But the classic in this space is a book called Getting to Yes. If you have more questions, I can't think of many activities that will earn you thousands of dollars per hour of effort, but reading Getting to Yes is absolutely one of them. So I highly recommend that book. Okay, so you've done your negotiating, you've got the best offer you can. Well, now we need to ensure our manager can advocate for us to get the full-time offer from our internship, or to get promoted at the head of our start class when we join a big firm, or to keep us when there are layoffs. So how do we do that? I think a lot of people think it's just about doing good work, but that's only part of the equation. Doing good work is expected, but empowering our managers to advocate for us is a separate step and something that needs to be proactively managed by you. Some managers don't make you proactively manage it and they will take care of it and they're wonderful, but they are the minority, not the majority. So how do you manage upward to put your manager in a position to advocate for you? I recommend setting up a weekly manager meeting. WMM with these specific sections to ensure that you stay on track in your role and also build likability. If you are an intern where you only have 12 weeks, or you're a co-op who only has 6 months to get a full-time offer, this is especially important. You don't have time to go on the wrong track. So the weekly manager meeting will be just an agenda for the meeting that you will bring in hard copy form to each of your meetings. The first topic will be updates. So here's the work you accomplished in the last week. So it lets them know, here's stuff that I did. So that way they can put it in a little file folder, and when it's time to write your review, they can just go through your weekly manager meetings and pick out the highlights that they want to cite for your review. Then, and this is the most important element, your ranked priorities for the coming week. So what do you understand are your top priorities for the week? And anything you can't get to this week, but is still important, you'll list under a separate section called future priorities. It's letting your manager know that your time is finite. So these are the things I have time to work on this week, and these are things that I think that are still important, but I won't get to until next week. By giving them a ranked priorities list, they are kind of signing off on what you're working on. When I see people fail to get a full-time offer from an internship or have a bad experience, it's generally because they were working on the wrong things, or they were spending too much time on things that weren't that important. So having this weekly check-in and having priorities ranked, make sure that you don't have more than a week of going down the wrong path. You know that before you go down the wrong path. So here's what I think is most important. Here's the second most important. Here's the third most important thing. This gives your manager, basically puts them on the hook. If you follow this, and they don't change your order of priorities, that's on them, not on you. It's bad management, not bad execution. So they may say, actually, priority number 2 is really our top priority this week. So put that up above number 1, or one of those future priorities needs to come into this week. And then you'll say, well, what can we move out of this week to make time for that? And then they'll offer you guidance on what's less time sensitive. The other nice thing about doing it this way is they'll say, well, your third priority for this week, that has a data request. You should start that data request now so that that data is available to you when you get around to it later this week. Okay, great. That's something that you wouldn't have gotten if you didn't have the chance to do this weekly update meeting. So rank your priorities, expect to be wrong a bunch on this, and that's fine. It's not embarrassing. It's just letting them guide your next week of work so that your updates that you'll show them next week will be things that make them happy rather than sad. Then final section will be questions for your manager. That could be a question about how to get one of your tricky projects done. It could be something that you saw them do well that you just want to learn more about. Like I saw you in the group meeting, you managed a pretty sensitive situation between a couple of our colleagues pretty well and effectively. How did you do that? Have you always known how to do that? It could be a question like that. How did you function well in our office? How did you do this project well? Or it could be a more open-ended question. How do you think this space is going to be most different 5 years from now? These are incredibly likable when you give your manager a chance to show off their expertise. It's just a great note to end these conversations on. Sometimes you'll get in some tense meetings where they'll be stressed or you'll run short on time. You can skip it. You can save that question for a future meeting. But in general, I want you to make a habit of tapping into your manager's expertise. It's going to let them leave the room with a good feeling about how the meeting went. They'll feel valued. Their own boss might not make them feel valued, but their direct report can definitely make them feel valued through these meetings. That means you get to keep doing these meetings. So end it on a good note by asking them a question about how they did their job well, or how you could do your job even better based on their experience. It simplifies your boss's annual evaluation of you, and it simplifies your resume prep in the future, because you'll keep a copy of these too. You can go through your updates and see what are the tasks that I really want to highlight on a future resume. Where can I source my stories for future interview questions? Like updates, absolutely, would be what I'd recommend here. You also have to prepare self-evaluations, you can go back through your last year of work and highlight them from that. All right, so let's close this section out. Then we got 10 minutes for questions if you have any. So big takeaways from the job closer. We covered a lot of ground in 2 hours, covered a lot of frameworks, but here are the things I want to leave you with. For resumes, don't stress about them. Only 20% of the 6 seconds that hiring managers are spending looking at your resume with human eyes is spent on your bullets. So do your best. Ed's 3-hour rule, spend 3 hours, do your best. Error-free is the most important thing. Objectively perfect, subjectively good enough. Do your best on your bullet points, When you're done with 3 hours, like move forward and start networking, and then just plan on plugging your interview stories into ChatGPT once the interview season is done to see what resume bullets it suggests based on the stories that you like telling. Cover letters, write them like an email to your boss's boss. A lot of people write long cover letters because they don't really know what to say, so they just say a lot and hope that something sticks. But the more you say, the less likely it is to be read, and it causes the e-waste problem that we're all concerned about. So write it like an email to your boss's boss. Use that RAC framework. Reason is bolded, colon, a sentence of anecdote and a sentence of connection, and you can get those things done in 250 words. And I love reading concise, effective cover letters. That puts someone directly the top of my pile if they have good business writing skills. Interviews, 77% of your outcomes are decided by the big four. Tell me about yourself. Why this company? Why this role? Why this sector? So definitely make sure you're feeling comfortable using FIT for tell me about yourself and RAC for the why questions. And that will get you through most interviews. Overall, in the chat box, do we think that, do we agree that recipes are better than tips for the job search? Is that a statement that we can buy into here on our way out the door? Excellent. Yes, thank you so much. Okay, just a quick recap of learning objectives. We used, so resumes, don't stress, Ed's 3-hour rules, cover letters, RAC, interview questions, it's all about the big four. FIT and RAC help us get through those. Negotiations, ask what flexibility they have, weekly manager meetings, make sure that you have them, and ranked priorities are agreed upon before you embark in work. So with that, I will say thank you so much for your time and participation today. I have a survey. Please click on that QR code. Tell me what you liked, what you want more content on in the future, and what you'd like less content on in the future. Consider this the start of a conversation and not the end of it. So if you have questions as you use these techniques, I have a LinkedIn group with about 15,000 people in it. I answer questions from readers of the Job Closer and the 2-Hour Job Search every day. So hop on there, post a question within I usually get to it within 7 to 10 days, or you could just lurk and see what questions other people have. If you'd like to connect more personally, please log in, or please find me at that LinkedIn QR code, and I'm happy to connect. And if you like this process, there's a workshop called the 2-Hour Job Search that you have the access to a recording of. Very similar frameworks for networking. How do you reach out to total strangers to get them to give you your time so that you can turn them into advocates to get you interview referrals? There's a workshop on that. You can watch that. You can borrow that book from the library. But if you have any questions at this point, we have a little bit of time. Please put your questions in the chat box if you have them as we are wrapping up here. Any questions? I know we covered a lot of ground for two hours, and it doesn't have to be on the content of these books. It could be on anything else that you're feeling challenged with right now. Feel free to raise your hand and take yourself off mute as well, if that's easier. Noel asks, do you recommend negotiating an internship offer? Great question, Noel. Thank you for asking that. I recommend trying to negotiate an internship offer. Typically, there will not be a lot of negotiation room, but it will still reflect positively on your brand that you tried. And if there is negotiation room, it's probably not going to be on salary. It's going to be something on like relocation expenses or maybe a subsidy to your living arrangement. But they're going to be pretty sensitive because for internships, often there's a starting cohort. And if there's too much of a discrepancy between one and another, they're going to have a hard time justifying it. But something like a relocation, if you can get your relocation as a lump sum, you can make an argument that you're moving from further away than some other people are. So you would benefit from a larger lump sum relocation expense, or some other subsidized internet or something, because you'll need to be working from home. Like, just get them talking. And if you start asking them where they have flexibility, they will probably guide you in the right direction. They're not going to personally benefit from keeping your offer to like $500 lower. So they're going to want to help you out just because they see you, they sympathize and empathize with you because you brought them in as a partner rather than an adversary. So don't expect it. Even the act of asking, getting turned down on most of the elements that you ask about. Oh, subsidized parking would be another good one. Even if you get turned down on most of the elements, you've still reflected your brand positively. What are some good questions to ask at the end of the interviews? Abhinav, I really like this question. In the 2-Hour Job Search, I talk about a framework called Tiara for managing informational meetings. And I think the trend and insight question, so basically it's a listening algorithm. By knowing kind of, so I attempt to optimize an order of questions to ask for an informational meeting, which maximizes the intimacy and likability that you can form with a total stranger in a single 30-minute conversation. And just like the Job Closer, it's all informed by behavioral economics and psychology and a lot of the science that's out there. So there's a very specific ordering of the questions, and then the questions are worded very specific ways. It's too deep a topic to get into right here, but I will say that there's a deep discussion on it in the video on the 2-hour job search and at the end of the 2-hour job search itself, if you check that out of the library. In general, I would say like Tiara stands for trends, insights, advice, resources, and assignments. Trend, insight, and advice questions are going to be the most useful. You're going to want to ask the questions in a way where they are framed as where they are flattering and fun to answer. So make them, instead of asking them, what's the corporate culture like at your firm? I don't like that one at all. If you're going to ask that question, ask it a better way, which is, what's your favorite part of the corporate culture of your firm? That way they're going to give you a superlative instead of a laundry list, and it's going to be something that is meaningful to them rather than a global truth that is probably on the website that they haven't checked in 10 years. So I like trend and insight questions. Trend questions are big macro ones. How do you think this space will be most different 5 years from now? Insight questions are a little more personal. You know, you've been at the company for 10 years. If you had to attribute your success to one skill or trait, what would it be? And a good follow-up question would be, is that unique to you or is that common amongst your peers? So some combination of Tiara questions, which are meant to be flattering and fun to answer, and research questions. Be prepared with both. You don't know which kind your interviewer will prefer, but I don't think you need to do these heavily researched questions that try to stump them on a fact. Those aren't fun to answer or receive. They're embarrassing if you don't know the answer. And also, ethically, if you get it answered, you shouldn't be able to ask it again since you already know the answers. They're like single use. So I really like questions that can be asked of 10 different people. You get 10 different answers, all of which are correct. Do either of these two expound more on negotiating? Yes. So Amanda, the job closer has a section on negotiating that goes into more detail than we had here. And it's sort of a meta survey on negotiating. So I reference getting to yes several times. I referenced Never Split the Difference and The Like Switch and other books that I've read that comprise the frameworks that I teach for negotiating. But really, if you find that the job closers discussion is not enough for you, Getting to Yes would be the book that I'd recommend for a deep dive. And again, it's a book you'll use for the rest of your life. It teaches you something called principle-based negotiating or interest-based negotiating rather than position-based negotiating, which is what so many other texts on negotiating teach you. How leverage and math and expected return. This is more about how do you bring your negotiating partner in as an ally rather than an adversary. On online applications, when they ask what you are wanting for your salary, what do you recommend putting? I recommend skipping this whenever possible, or putting a range, or putting in language. I wouldn't put too much stock in it. I would ask ChatGPT what it expects as a starting salary for this, and then bump it up 20%. I would also check a website like levels.fyi, which can give you kind of salaries. I think it's a free tool. I think it's a free tool that you can use to check most jobs. This will give you a ballpark. You just want to give them a ballpark. Really, what your safety valve will be will be that I didn't fully understand. It looks like the description of the job in the job offer is different than what was in the job description that was put forth when I interviewed. In some slight ways, I just want to make sure that the work that is outlined here is getting fairly compensated. So there's always going to be a difference between what they ask you to do and what was in the job description. They bring more thought to what's going to be in there. So I would keep it to a range, and I would not put too much stress or thought into it. I would let ChatGPT or Levels give me a benchmark and then bump it up 10 or 20%. When researching a company, what are the main things to know going into the interview? Good question, Samantha. I cover that more in the 2-hour job search. How do you prep for an informational meeting? So but I don't go through it in my talk. It's one of the things I have to cut to make a talk on the 2-hour job search fit 2 hours, which is ironic. But there's a lot there. For me, what I want you to be ready for, I want you to make sure you're ready to answer the big four. To me, that's prep that you do once and it works for most companies. But I want you to make sure that you can answer what I call the high fastball question. Like, what do you think of our company right now? What do you think of what our company's doing? What do you think differentiates us from our peers? It's these kind of what I call high fastball questions, because they're usually the tough ones are really general. Like, you know more of the specifics, but an easy way to do this is ask for a SWOT analysis. You could use ChatGPT for this, or you could use a database like PitchBook or Crunchbase, if you have like those. But I would be looking at SWOT analyses for these companies to make sure that I know strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And then I'd make sure I had an answer prepared of like, where do you think what do you think of did you hear our bit? I want you to make sure that you're aware of current headlines as well. Did you see our big headline this week? I always want you to know the answer to that question. I want the answer to be yes. So Google the company, see what good news they are posting on their websites, but see what bad news might signal some topics you want to avoid. And that will show up in news feeds, not on the company website, obviously. But then I also want you to be able to answer those big picture questions. What's our competitive advantage? If you can answer that one, you can probably answer anything else, but a SWOT analysis is a good kind of thing to walk in with in your memory. Okay, I think we hit all of our questions. So thank you all so much for spending the last 2 hours with me. I hope you found it a good use of your time, and congratulations on all fulfilling your attendance credit. You made it.